Salutations, gamers. Welcome to the Greenlit Gaming Podcast Episode 1. I am your leader, Joda, and please give a warm round of applause for my feisty follower, D'Cruz.
More like your orderly. I think I need to tighten those straps on your straitjacket. Hello listeners, glad you could join us as we delve into Joda's twisted mind, and of course gaming discussion. But before we jump into that, we need to make a correction to our pilot podcast. Street Fighter's 25th anniversary is actually this year. The original came out in arcades August 30th, 1987. So if you guys are interested, Capcom have just announced their 25th anniversary collection. It's going to cost you a pretty penny, but it may be worth it.
Oh, you were doing such a good job passing yourself off as a Street Fighter fan, only to make one little mistake.
Yes, Joda, you've discovered I am fallible.
Get out.
You sure? You'll be on your own, in the dark.
I don't want to be on my own in the dark. Please come back.
There, Joda. Let's talk games.
Yes, please. This week, we'll be looking at a subject that we hinted at in the notes of our previous episode, which is loneliness in gaming. How different games use loneliness to maybe create a sense of dread or a sense of terror, and yet how other games can use it to create a sense of liberation. D'Cruz, have you worked on any games which invoke loneliness on the players?
Well, I have worked on some games that use loneliness not so much as a core feature, but usually to use it as a technique to build companionship with a non-playable character. You play with them in quests for a little bit, but then you take them away, and then you do tend to miss them, and you want them to come back. We also use it as a technique to build up tension towards a fight or an introduction to an enemy character, or sometimes associating with another character with loneliness itself. So being in a dark, dingy cave, walking around with nothing else, no light, except maybe the enemy voice. But no, I've not worked on any games where the loneliness is a core feature. I mean, you've been playing some recently, haven't you?
Yes, some strange reason I'm a big fan of these type of games, but a game that would use it as maybe a core feature could be Shadow of the Colossus, or something like Silent Hill series. Certainly it works quite well with games that are trying to create maybe a horror or dread or psychological kind of impact on the player. The more recent Dear Esther as well uses it. But there was always this wonderful feeling you get when playing Shadow of the Colossus, that it is just you up against these mighty colossi, and it's reflected very well in the entire environment of the game. You, your horse, who is a companion, like you mentioned as well, the loss of a companion, or just having that other being there with you, because the rest of the world is essentially empty, void. You get the occasional thing flying around, but there's nothing else, no other players, no other civilization to interact with. And it's just this epic sense of you versus it, with nothing else between you, just this battle.
Do you feel any companionship with the creatures you're fighting? Because essentially they are all that's in the world, and you do tend to feel a bit sorry killing them sometimes.
You can do, yes, you can do. It's I think the effect it has is quite profound, actually. As you play the game, even after beating each colossi, something happens, and more's revealed obviously at the end, but it's quite a moving experience as well. The thing that you're about to destroy is one of the only few things in this environment that is actually animated, that is actually, like, quote unquote living, that exists there, and that the more of these colossi that you destroy, the less of this environment there is, in a way, because there's hardly anything there to begin with, and until it's just you and your horse, and well, yeah, these colossi must die to well, not to give anything away, I suppose. But anyway, yeah. So
I mean, yeah, it's quite a big contrast. I mean, in comparison, another game that's very similar but doesn't take the loneliness approach. And when I'm going to say loosely similar, but if you look at Lost Planet, for instance, essentially you're a guy taking on giant creatures in the snow, and most of the time you are on your own. But it doesn't really portray loneliness that well, does it? Because you've got so many living creatures to kill, and you're basically running from one location to the next, gunning everything as you go along, and it's almost you're excited to see the next mob to shoot at. In comparison to Shadow of the Colossus, where, like you said, there's only the Colossi, and so there's that vast void in between, and which produces that lonely feeling.
That void is so brilliant at building tension as you hold your sword into the air and wait to see which direction the next one's in. You can't see it yet, but you know you're going to get to it somewhere on the horizon, and you just ride, just waiting to get to this thing, and just the tension's building and building and building. And yeah, the environment changes, and it's beautiful. And it was incredible to behold on the limitations of the PS2, even when I played it way back then. But it's this great sense of tension, of dread, of anxiety that, what am I going to face next? What am I going to face next? But also kind of wonderment, because there's nothing else for you, just this Colossus. And you get totally enthralled by it. It does it very, very well. Very, very well.
Whereas strikes the right balance, then it doesn't let you get bored.
No, I don't think so. I think for me as a player, it kept me very enthralled and curious as to what the next one was going to be. They're all vastly different and provide very unique forms of attack and puzzle solving. They themselves, I mean, each Colossus is essentially a level, so to speak, if you want to look at it very sort of black and white. And they remain unique and intriguing throughout the gameplay, and strong and powerful. And you, as a small boy, feel just this sense of strength and superiority over beating and battling this thing down, which is obviously a Colossus. The sense of achievement you get is incredible from taking one down. Yeah, definitely. Whereas I suppose games, like you say, where there are other NPCs running around that aren't necessarily your companions, but it's just kind of enemies to shoot. I suppose in a way you're still lonely, even in something like Lost Planet or something. You're still lonely. Because it's not like that. Well, yeah, you do meet NPCs in that, don't you? Whereas
there is a story, and there's somebody.
There is quite a strong story, precisely. Whereas a game like the Silent Hill series, that uses loneliness very well. One of my favorite being Silent Hill 2. It begins with a character who receives, obviously, the letter from his dead wife. So this is his closest companion that has been taken away. We know this character is lonely. He's suffering anguish because of his loneliness, and you're about to embark into a town full of his nightmares and demons that are going to tug at this sense of fear and loneliness that he has, and destroy his psyche in doing so. And that's a game where you run in terror from just on your own constantly until you meet these fleeting companions who are also just as lonely and as isolated as you are. Yet none of the relationships ever seem to gel with the NPCs that you meet. There are only kind of these fleeting moments where you meet them, you exchange a problem or a question in sort of slightly cryptic script, and
then moments later they're dead.
Some of them survive quite well, but they just they go, they vanish. You have to go. You head off on your quest for companionship. You head off on your quest to find out, is your wife still alive? Who could have sent this letter? What else is there? And if there's any kind of chance of retribution, of forgiveness of some kind, then you will go for it, and you don't want to be lonely anymore. You want her back. The whole kind of doppelganger that you meet in the game.
That's clearly more your character's motivations while playing. What about you as a player when you're playing through these games? Well, like Silent Hill. Because your character's motivation is obviously he doesn't want to be lonely anymore, but how does that get across to you as a player?
The Silent Hill games have always used that wonderful fog, which I think I don't know, from the old PS1 days into the PS2 days, it's a great way of limiting your draw distance, but also a fantastic way of creating, again, a sense of isolation and dread without being able to see more than like 10 meters ahead of you what's just up there. That then the noises, the use of sound in the games is so brilliant that I think it absorbs you as you play it. It really absorbs you, the player, into the world of Harry Mason or whoever is your protagonist and hero there in that game. I get very wrapped up in the emotional storytelling of the Silent Hill games, especially 2. 1 and 3 are excellent as well, but yeah, they draw you in very, very well through their clever mechanics, through the use of wonderful sound, like I say, and through the draw distance too, and the fact that these enemies are terrifying, the fact that you can die very easily at spotting them or them chasing you, and you're incredibly limited with your ammo and such, that you're always looking for the next safe house or maybe somebody that could help you.
I think that's another thing that it's not so much the loneliness, it's your inability to deal with a lot of the threats in the game. I mean, what you were saying there reminded me of a game that it's probably the most terrifying game I've ever played. Like, I literally cannot play it for longer than an hour at a time. And I promised myself that I would play it in the dark, and that's Condemned. And I'm sure I wouldn't feel the same way if I played it during the day. But if you play a game like Condemned at night with the curtains drawn, the lights off, and especially in a first-person view, you feel much more like the character as opposed to Silent Hill being in third person. And I know they're all very tightly scripted moments in Condemned. I know as you walk past a certain trigger box, a sound will play. As you walk down a corridor with a certain thing in view, a shadow will go across. But the game is so well paced and so tightly scripted that I am just terrified. My hands are shaking as I open a door, or get a crowbar to knock through something, and then they shock you with those brief moments where somebody tries to attack you. But yeah, it's very well done.
Yeah, just as a side note as well, Condemned is another favorite game of mine for its use of sound. Beautiful audio throughout it. All of the wonderful crunching, cracking, strange, scurrying noises that you hear in it are excellent. Should always be played in 5.1. It's amazing. I just have to say, its audio design blew me away. It's so good. But another game, I suppose, that uses where your character is destined for loneliness and strives for loneliness would be something like the Thief series. That's another personal favorite. A character that is always hiding in the shadows. It's quite different from playing something like Assassin's Creed, because Assassin's Creed is actually a game full of companionship in a way. But the Thief games, Garrett is out on his own all the time, hiding in shadows constantly. You don't want to be seen by anybody, and those games used use Garrett's need for isolation and his need to work alone to be both liberating, I found, and terrifying as hell at the same time. The moment you feel like you've got the upper hand on these guards and you've worked out a clever way of dousing these torches or evading them, and using your freedom it was quite liberating and quite powerful. But at the same time, there are some awesomely freaky moments in the Thief series, and some very, very terrifying things where you will just cower in the corner of a room in the dark shadows, hoping that that guard, when he comes running in, isn't going to spot you at all. It's simple kind of stuff, but
So unfortunately for me, I find that like playing Thief, the AI back then wasn't that great.
No,
and therefore, like those situations where you mentioned cowering in this corner, you'd cower there for a second, but then as soon as the guard came round and did something dumb, you'd kind of laugh, and you'd lose all immersion of that loneliness and the tension, because you're just like, oh, he's so dumb. Look, I'm in the light. Oh, I'm in the dark.
Yeah, that's a game where, again, I think its audio engine was far better than its graphics engine. Thief 2 was a brilliant game as well, but I've always, I always enjoyed this idea of working alone in those sort of games. I think the storyline and the character you play strive for the loneliness. So it's not just a mechanic; it's actually a necessity for your character that you play. One of the other recent games that I've played, which by that game company.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Is
Journey. I thought you were going to go there.
I do like Journey, but but before I talk about Journey though, they did Flower before that, and that's a game where you're kind of lonely, I suppose.
Is it really? Because you're not really anything in Flower. It's
you're a petal.
A petal
you're
in the
a
wind.
flower petal on his own, who makes one friend, and then by the end of the game has got millions of friends, all colourful petals floating around.
See, I'm not sure if I can give you that one on that, but I can understand where you're going with Journey. But that has a very strong multiplayer element, and when another character, which is quite often the case in Journey, comes into your game, don't you feel you lose that loneliness?
Well, they deliberately withhold your full companionship, so to speak. So without being able to talk to that person, only speak to them in chiming noises. I'm not going to do it again. I did it in the last episode. I'm not going to do it again. Should I do it again?
No.
Anyway, it's they're deliberately keeping that sense of they're trying to keep that sense of loneliness there, and yet hinting at a companionship of some kind, just giving you that hand to hold in a game which you are playing on your own, until these random fleeting moments where you do glimpse somebody else, and it's kind of like, oh wow, cool, I want to see what they're doing. Oh, what do they look like? They look slightly different to me. Wow, are they farther in the game, or have they done something different? But not being able to ask them any of these questions, not being able to ask them where should we go, what to do, only for them to then wander off maybe, and you're on your own again, or you visit one part of the level and they visit another and they vanish again, and suddenly, you're on your own once more. And it's like you were saying earlier, you give somebody this companionship and then take them away, and suddenly they realize how lonely they are in a landscape. Journey is very similar in a way to Shadow of the Colossus. That is quite barren of any kind of living things, anything that your character can talk to or your player can interact with in a way of companionship. It's just you and the level and the puzzles and the journey to make. That is it. It's you trying to get to the top of this mountain, and nothing, no buddy really stands in your way. But there are the odd enemy out there, but essentially it's in making this journey, which almost feels quite spiritual, to the top of the mountain. So it uses its idea of loneliness, I think, to create quite a profound experience through its beautiful graphics and very, very, very stirring, emotive score as well. I don't know, maybe companions could perhaps get in the way or force a kind of storyline onto you that doesn't really need to be there. The whole game feels very, very, emotional and just bursting out of your imagination as you play it. And I really like that. But companionship might end up, forcing some kind of narrative or extra details that don't perhaps need to be there, and it does it very well on its own.
It's quite interesting what you're saying about like the when you're comparing Shadow of the Colossus and Journey with the barren landscapes, because it's
Yeah,
not
I
very
don't mean.
often that you have the kind of vast openness to kind of signify loneliness. Well,
Mm,
whereas for me, I always find that tight corridors, small environments
yeah,
tend to promote loneliness more. But on the other extreme, having a barren landscape, it does the same effect.
that's right. Yeah, you can still be very lonely on a very tight, confined environment. Can aid to sort of claustrophobia maybe in the player if you want to put that kind of emotion across.
Whilst recording this podcast, we realised we were waffling on a tad, so have decided to split it in twain and will continue in the second episode.
Yeah, so guys, just tune in next week. Well, hopefully, when we get it out. And but for now, this is us saying goodbye. And you can follow us on Twitter at Greenlit Gaming, and follow us on our YouTube channel at Greenlit Gaming, and email us on greenlitgaming@gmail.com. So that's a goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Remember, tune in next week for the thrilling conclusion.